This is a response to PPSimmons' video Evolution, oh the irony of it all. But before we begin, I'd like to clarify a few things. Firstly, I think it's time for me to stop addressing the shady group of individuals known as PPSimmons and direct my responses to Carl Gallups, the narrator of all their videos. It's my contention that Pastor Gallups is actually the leader of this particularly unpleasant group of dishonest alleged Christians, and so I think it's time for him to stop hiding behind their skirts and take responsibility for his words and the reprehensible falsehoods that he's intent on spreading. Secondly, as usual, Carl, you've liberally sprinkled your video with the word evolutionist, and it's starting to get on my tits. This word is, of course, an entirely creationist construct intended as a derogatory slur because in reality no rationalist, as your word implies, actually believes in evolution but instead accepts it as a valid and highly successful explanation of observable physical reality. I therefore want to make it clear that when I respond to the snide misrepresentations that you aim at these evolutionists, I'm in no way accepting the validity of the word or its use by sneaky little toads like you. Finally, I'd like to thank fellow YouTuber Fulsham49 for all his help with the archaeological aspects of this video, since this is not my area. He's a professional in the field and uses his expertise to make fascinating videos debunking biblical literalists' claims. If you're not subscribed to him, you really should be. So with all that said, let's pull on a hazmat suit, wade into the muddy waters and take a look at what kind of sewage has been pouring out of the PPSimmons channel this time.
Isn't it ironic that the evolutionist who doesn't believe there's any intelligent design to their makeup think that they are so much more intelligent than those of us who do think there is an intelligence involved in our design?
It might be ironic if it were true, Carl, but as with so much of what you say on your channel, it is, of course, complete bullshit. I can't speak for other rationalists, though I suspect I do for many, but I don't necessarily make the assumption that all creationists are unintelligent, though of course there are cases where that's the only conclusion that can be reasonably drawn. However, intelligence, of course, is a useless thing if you refuse to use it. So what I do assert is that because of the warping of their minds by their religion, creationists are either ignorant, irrational, or a mixture of both, and in whichever combination this also makes them stupid. I'll also readily admit, though, that this sometimes makes it difficult to distinguish between a merely misinformed or deluded God-botherer and someone who's trying to get out of kindergarten with less than a full box of Crayolas, and in many cases the jury's still out. The former, of course, aren't necessarily doomed to remain stupid indefinitely. For them, there's always the opportunity to pry open the box in which they've secreted their intelligence, blow off the cobwebs, and actually either look at all the readily available scientific evidence with an open mind or at their own beliefs with a critical one. The latter, on the other hand, are simply doomed to living out their lives like desert goat herders clinging to the verges of the oasis of knowledge, convinced that their primitive fables proffer better explanations of the world than the evidence provided by nature herself. I'm not sure which category you belong to yet, Carl, but of course there's always the possibility that you're smarter than anyone's giving you credit for and that you're simply utilizing your talent for lying like a News International employee to make it easier for you to fleece your flock. In any case, for now I'm not sure, so unlike you, I'm keeping an open mind.
Isn't it ironic that if the human brain is the result of an unintelligent, unpurposed, random, and natural selection process, how can we trust the human brain then to lead us to truth about our origins or in any other matter of intelligent pondering?
Do you really think that that amounts to some kind of cogent argument, Carl? I'd take a little more care if I were you, because supposed insights like that are apt to push you closer to the mystical forest category. Whether the human brain evolved from, as you creationists like to put it, a rock or was conjured up from nothing by an inscrutable pixie has nothing to do with its current capacity for reason, in the same way that whether you produce your videos on a computer or on a toilet has no effect on whether you can broadcast them over the internet. Also, isn't it ironic that the chimp in your clip was facepalming as we listened to you demonstrate that if you do possess some intelligence, it's securely secreted in a safe and secret place known only to you and your proctologist?
Isn't it ironic that the evolutionist and the creationist are both looking at the exact same evidence? The difference is in the interpretation of the evidence. The evolutionist looks at the evidence and spends his days trying to devise schemes in which the obvious elements of design before his eyes could have gotten here without a designer. So consequently, much of the evolutionary literature is expended on devising explanations why there is no intelligence behind the enormous complexity of life that he observes.
There you go again with your same evidence, different interpretation lie. It should be clear now to anyone who's watched Holy Hallucinations 15 and 16 why you're pulling this particular argument from where the sun don't shine, presumably in a desperate hope that some of your intelligence may stick to it. So let's see if we can shove it back up from where it came from, shall we, Carl? The schemes that you refer to in your own uniquely smug and self-satisfied way are rational frameworks that are carefully constructed by scientists to explain all the observed physical phenomena in terms of observable and measurable processes. The explanations they devise make definite and specific predictions, and their validity is tested against reality by observation and experiment and must be repeatable by anyone who questions the veracity. Predictive failures or new inconsistent observations result in the modification of the scheme to produce one that more closely resembles reality. And while this iterative process of testing and independent verification results in models that describe and predict reality with a great deal of accuracy, it leaves no room for the incorporation of the voices that people like you hear in your heads, or for the laughably preposterous stories in your book of fairy tales. Additionally, your alternative scheme, Carl, offers no testable predictions, and not one piece of physical evidence has ever been uncovered to support it. With that being the case, do you think you could provide just one way in which we could distinguish whether it describes anything in the real world or whether it's just your preferred fanciful fantasy? Could you also explain why this design that you take for granted is so obvious, Carl? Because if you think that your vague hand-waving about how complicated everything is convinces anyone who's honestly looked at the rational explanations, then you're doing nothing more than gazing at the world with the eyes of a 3,000-year-old barbarian and wondering why no one else sees what you do. The apparent design of living, replicating biological systems has nothing to do with the actual design of inanimate human constructs and is exquisitely explained by evolutionary theory, no matter how deeply into the sand you're willing to bury your head to deny them, or how tightly you hold on to your cherished but improbably implausible fantasies. Finally, you may be aware that there are a large number of schemes similar to yours that claim to explain the natural world and the nature of the designer of these designs that you perceive. How do you propose that we evaluate these alternatives, Carl? Are your baseless assertions, devoid of even the smallest shred of empirical evidence, really any more valid than those of the next nutjob with a voice in his head? If so, then why? Or do you think that the seeker of knowledge is best served by rolling up his sleeve, dipping his hand into a pot of alternative fictions, and deciding the nature of reality by playing fantasy bingo?
They proclaim that modern man has been here about 150,000 years. Interestingly, in all of our years of searching, the oldest artifacts that can with 100% certainty be linked to man, such as buildings, cities, structures, verifiably and indisputable man-made tools, books, boats, art, man-made mechanisms, etc., the oldest artifacts are estimated to be between no more than 6,000 to 10,000 years old, at the very oldest. By the way, this is exactly how long man has been here according to the Bible, about 6,000 to 10,000 years.
Firstly, science doesn't proclaim anything. It makes statements about the nature of reality based upon the collected physical evidence. These statements are strictly provisional and subject to change at any time upon the production of contradictory data, but at present the evidence points to the most likely origin of man as being approximately 250,000 years ago. It's the closed-minded religious zealots like you, Carl, who hold up their ancient myths and stories as dogmatic, unquestionable, and unalterable truth without even the merest whiff of evidence to support them that are doing all the proclaiming. Secondly, Carl, I was under the impression that your colleague in fucktardery, Bishop James Ussher, used your very own Bible to calculate that the world was exactly 6,015 years old. In fact, his analytical instrument was so precise that he managed to pin down the moment of creation to the evening of Sunday the 22nd of October 4004 BC. Why is it then, Carl, that you've extended the range of his prediction by 4,000 years? Is it because the good Reverend's calculator was on the fritz? Or perhaps your book isn't quite as inherent as you'd like us to believe. Or maybe it's the fact that we now have tree ring data going back at least 10,000 years and that we've identified human artifacts that reach back equally far. I'm guessing that even a mendacious prick with a talent for dishonesty as immense as yours doesn't feel that he's able to reach far enough up his alimentary canal to fish out whoppers big enough to deny this incontrovertible evidence. If you made an effort to look at the actual science you're denying, you'd have to reach so far up you'd be able to wave at us through your mouth. Thirdly, let's look at your assertion that the oldest discovered man-made artifacts are dated at no more than 10,000 years, and your less than subtle implication that this is because the true age of the Earth is revealed by your desert storybook. Of course, you're completely ignoring that most of the artifacts I mentioned earlier weren't found buried under alluvial deposits that should have been laid down by the global flood that the book that you base your understanding of the universe on states happened 4,500 years ago, despite any physical evidence to support it. And perhaps you're unaware of the Natufian grain storage bins from Jericho that have been dated to 11,500 years, eh, Carl? And if that's still recent enough for you to feel comfortable with shifting the goalposts again, then what about the Lascaux cave paintings that have been dated at 17,000 years? And if you can still manage to stretch your credibility that far, then there's the Hohlefels cave figurine from Germany dated at 35,000. Where does that leave your creation fable now, Carl? Do you need a clue? Of course, I did notice that you were careful to leave a caveat in your assertion big enough to drive a Hummer through, and that was that nothing older has been linked to man with 100% certainty. So let me guess who gets to decide what's 100% certain. It's you, isn't it, Carl? Presumably, if you were in the habit of defending the bullshit that you keep spouting like a leaky hose, then you'd find some way of dismissing these as not being the work of men. Well, fortunately for us, you won't have the chance because you've managed to fuck yourself royally in your own video. I'll explain how after I deal with a couple more of your dirty little lies.
Isn't it ironic that the human being is so far atop the evolutionary scale, it is as though we are an alien being dropped in this world from another universe? The evolutionist rarely addresses this obvious conundrum of irony.
Perhaps that's because scientists have better things to do with their time than deal with the lingering stench left by the brain farts of deliberately ignorant and intentionally deceptive fucktards. If you want to spend your time indulging in such pointless mental masturbation, that's fine, just don't expect rationalists to feel the need to explain to you why you have such an unsightly stain in your underpants. Now, presumably, you're trying to create the impression that some kind of unbridgeable biological gap exists between humans and other animals that can only be explained by the existence of an all-powerful, invisible cosmic being that has nothing better to do with its time than play with the dolls that it made out of mud to amuse itself. However, you seem to be ignoring that humans share with the rest of the animal kingdom essentially the same genetic material, the same genetic code, the same bioenergetic mechanisms, the same metabolic processes, the same signaling pathways, and the same subcellular structures. Especially note that this means that we're not made out of the shit that one of the two contradictory stories in your book claims your God fashioned us from.
But nothing out of 20 million species of life even comes within a universe of being close to the magnificence of the human being. So what is the irony? The evolutionist relegates humanity to simply a branch of natural selection, off of the chimpanzees and apes through a common ancestor.
Don't you find that just a little conceited, Carl? And while the achievements of mankind are indeed impressive, how superior are we really? After all, insects are more numerous, cheetahs are faster, gorillas are stronger, birds can fly, fish can breathe underwater, and dogs can lick their own bollocks. That aside, you once again display your complete inability to formulate anything that can even begin to be considered a reasonable argument against evolution. What exactly does your subjective, arbitrary, and biased evaluation of the place of Homo sapiens in the animal kingdom have to do with the veracity of evolutionary theory and the unshakable edifice of evidence on which it's built? If I were allowed to get away with these kinds of absurdities, I'd be able to assert with equal validity that my belief that you're a smug, lying, hypocritical sack of rancid fecal matter means that the Pope doesn't like wearing outrageously extravagant frocks and a silly pointy hat. The facts are that your personal opinion and the actual evidence have nothing to do with each other, and that you're simply resorting to your old stalwarts again, the arguments from ignorance and incredulity. If you actually took the time to come up with some new points, Carl, then I'd be happy to address them and perhaps wouldn't feel the need to pad out the remainder of my videos by insulting you, no matter how much you deserve it.
Only the human writes books, produces art, invents music, constructs and plays musical instruments, travels through the air with invented technology. But of course, all of this extraordinary intelligence and uniqueness came only to humans. One species in 20 million species. 1 in 20 million. And if you don't believe this, they say, well, you are unintelligent. Oh, the irony of it all.
Fucking hell, Carl, is this the only argument you've got? One last time. Your perceived status of the human race on this planet has nothing to do with the scientific theory that explains how we got here, and is certainly not evidence for us being poofed into existence by the great voyeur in the sky, though it is strong evidence of your smug sense of self-importance. But anyway, that's not the reason I showed this clip. It was preceded by almost a minute of you waxing lyrical on the achievements of humanity, most of which I omitted to spare my viewers the inconvenience of having to run to the toilet in the middle of this video. I did, however, include a small portion of your nauseating soliloquy, and I wonder if you've spotted why yet. Do you remember, Carl, how you expounded earlier that we've never found a single artifact older than 10,000 years that's been linked to man with 100% certainty, and then suggested that this meant that your fables about the age of the Earth and mankind were true? Well then, isn't it ironic that right here you just stated that only man can create objects such as the 17 and 35,000-year-old artifacts I presented to you earlier? And isn't it ironic that the videos you produce to support your laughably simplistic beliefs do nothing other than pwn themselves and your feeble and flaccid arguments? And finally, isn't it ironic that the very video in which you claim that rationalists assert that creationists are unintelligent goes such a long way to demonstrating that they may actually have a point?